Welcome to the Ranchonomics Podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode. If you have not heard part 1, you'll want to go back to the episode we aired last week and listen to that. And from here, we will begin again. There are lots of advantages to equity investing. When you're talking about reasonable returns in that area, you are on the order of 10-ish%. Is that a fair number?
10, 11% over time.
Okay, so using the rule of 72, we are doubling our money every 7-ish years. Is that fair?
6 to 7 year. You bet.
Love it. Okay. With any particular period, obviously not necessarily conforming to the average, but the average being a
absolutely
30 to 100 year look, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's contrast that with being invested in livestock or any other commodity. And to my mind, oil and gas and farm commodities are all fairly similar. What are some of the pros and cons there?
One thing I see about the cattle market, and you and I have talked about this, we talk about diversity stock portfolio. I think, you can put cattle out to graze in a lot of different places. You buy geographic diversity that way. Mm-hmm. You don't have to do it all on your home farm or your home ranch. And I like that concept quite a lot. You and I have discussed this quite a bit too, John. I think in order to be satisfied in the cattle business, I think you've got to have a return somewhere 15% or greater year in, year out. I mean, there's going to be years where you make nothing on some cattle, but I think you've got to have a return that's in excess of what you can do with a passively managed index fund. And that got to be in excess of maybe 30, 40% in order to justify the effort that goes into it. And if you can't consistently do that, you might ought to rethink where I'm putting my money.
Yep. So the benchmark that we hold for, let's say, blue chip stocks, in the S&P 500.
And 11% there, I'd like to have 14, 15, 16% out of the cattle deal.
Or more, right? We assume that the risk profile justifies a significantly higher reward, right? And just the amount of work required.
Absolutely. Yeah, even if you have cattle to send out to graze somewhere, you don't have to put work in, but you're compensating that person that's grazing the cattle for you.
Yep.
So the work is still being done. You've got death loss and gain to be concerned about. When we talk about death loss, I don't suppose that differs dramatically from a short-term market drawdown if we're talking about stocks, but nonetheless, you've got more variables in the cattle business, I think, and so therefore you have to have a greater return over time.
One of the other things that I find interesting about the livestock business that also applies to real estate, I know people apply it to equities, but I do not. The ability to borrow against an actual asset. You want to comment on that at all?
Stay away from margining stock.
Okay, why?
Well, Peter Lynch was probably the most well-known mutual fund manager of all times. And Peter Lynch actually worked for Fidelity. He ran the Fidelity Magellan Fund for 17 years.
Okay. Yeah,
and his average annual rate of return just ran circles around anybody in the industry. Mm-hmm. But in one of his books, I believe it was One Up on Wall Street, he had a famous quote that was, "Don't ever confuse brains with a bull market." Mm-hmm. Everybody's smart when the market's running straight up. So my point about that being, that's where people get sucked into the idea. We talked about greed earlier. Golly, the market's going up every day. We can borrow as long as we keep 33% equity in this account. If I have $100,000 of stock, I can borrow $100,000. So why don't we just do that? And, the interest rate's 8% or 6% or whatever it is. So if the market continues running up like it is, I'm just going to really get rich by borrowing money. But the problem is the knife cuts deeper when the market goes down like you saw this last week. Mm-hmm. Part of the acceleration that we've seen in the decline of the market over the last 4 or 5 days, John, is people that are receiving massive margin calls that are having to liquidate stock to meet those margin calls. And when you liquidate stock to meet a margin call, your equity also goes down, and generally it will kick off another margin call.
Yep.
It's just like dominoes falling. Mm-hmm. So be careful about margining stock. You can buy options on stock. To some extent, you've got some leverage there, but you also have finite risk. Once again, we talk about the concept of buying options versus being an option seller, and that's a whole nother subject.
That gets complex fast.
Yeah. I don't have a problem borrowing money on a line of credit with cattle. As long as we're kind of following the Bud Williams paradigm, we don't worry that much about what we sell, but we worry a lot about what we buy back. That's where the excess cash flow comes from.
And we have enough equity that we can ride through market changes without causing trouble with the bank. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you've got to have an adequate amount of equity, obviously, and don't ever be borrowed to the hill.
What in your mind is a limit? What's a reasonable range on the upper end?
On the cattle deal, I don't want to be over probably 50% there.
Okay. 50% your money, 50% the bank's money.
Yeah, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah. And again, that allows you to ride out a 50% market drop, which we have seen in a 6-month period.
Yeah.
Fairly comfortably.
Everybody has a different feel about what they're comfortable with, too.
Yes. Okay, good. All right. So then if you're talking, let's just say you mentioned the number, 15% return on cattle is kind of your minimum. Then your 72 divided by 15 comes out to be what, on the order of, it's less than 5.
4.5 to 5.
Yeah. So your ability to double your money has accelerated by a couple of years at that point. Basically 25% kind of thing.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, great. So that is one of the things that makes livestock an attractive investment, even though there is risk to it. The other part, I don't know if you want to comment, there are some differences tax-wise in what we can do when we're running livestock compared to when we're buying and selling equities. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I don't run enough cows to really talk about the aspect of capital gain treatments. You're better informed on that than I am, because nearly everything I do is yearlings. I have a few cows, but why don't you touch on that, John?
Well, just that, again, I think our tax system is really biased towards livestock production and agriculture in general. So we don't have to get into specifics, but there are definitely tax advantages to owning livestock. And one of them being all of our expenses are tax deductible if we have a profit to put it against, a taxable profit, if you will. Whereas my sitting on the computer and doing research on equities or even traveling to look at companies, it's a little more challenging there to how you actually expense that, right?
Absolutely. Of course, one thing I will say that is another advantage of some sort to equity investing is that your estate will have a stepped up basis at your death on stock.
Correct. That's right. Which will also happen to your livestock enterprise.
And it'll happen on your
real
livestock.
estate.
It'll happen on your real estate.
Yeah. So that stepped up basis, again, they talk every election cycle about eliminating that. And that is a wonderful, wonderful tax benefit that really helps us out.
It certainly is.
The other thing about equities, I guess, that would maybe be a bit of an advantage, but cattle are still very good in this, especially when compared to real estate, is they are very, very liquid.
Absolutely.
You could sell any equity you own basically between business hours tomorrow.
8:30 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon.
Yeah. And stocker cattle would not be much different, right? I mean, there are a few months of the year where the market's kind of sluggish, but generally you could get those cattle moving if you need to turn them into cash.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. Have you taken a sell-by marketing course, but still found yourself unsure of what to do when the auctioneer started talking fast and the gavel started banging? The cattle are going in and out. Suddenly you don't even know what lot you're bidding on. It's hard to evaluate the cattle, run the math while still keeping one ear on the bid price. The worst part is it's probably been a month and you still haven't taken any decisive action. We've been there, and you want to know what makes it better? Practice. But not just any practice, realistic pressured practice. This is exactly why ranching.fyi is hosting their first strategic ranch simulation, October 28th to 30th in Gillette, Wyoming. The sim program is designed to help you start winning under pressure and to think on your feet and adapt to changing circumstances without letting time slip away. Don't miss out. Sign up today and we will see you in Gillette, Wyoming on October 28th to the 30th. Visit www.ranching.fyi before the gavel taps. The one other thing I want you to just comment on, and you have had a wonderful career and I know learned lots of things. Talked about market timing. I want you to talk a little about duration and maybe persistence. Seems to me when you and I talk, it always comes back to this idea that you've got to keep at it, that we're in this for the long term. Is that correct?
I guess I'm getting to the age where I probably ought not buy green bananas, John. I don't know, but you have to assume that there is still a long term remaining for you, I think.
Right.
And invest accordingly. If you're unable or unwilling to do that, it's time to cash in, I suppose. Because if we start running from every hiccup in the market or strutting around too much when the market's going in our favor, we're setting ourselves up for problems.
Mm-hmm. And again, the big lever is duration. Your returns will vary, but boy, if you keep at it for decades, you will, whether it's investing consistently into a mutual fund or like an index fund, or whether it's consistently buying and selling capital profitably, if you do that for 30 or 40 years, don't let anyone tell you that it is not possible to become very rich doing that. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And,
Okay.
I might mention one other thing as it relates to the cattle industry. I'm not necessarily opposed to a university degree. I have one. I'm not sure how much good it ever did me. I made lifelong friends, and I think that's helped me to a large extent. But we've got resources available to younger people today, and I hope you have some younger people on this listen to this podcast. We have resources available to these younger people today that I couldn't even dream of when I got out of college.
Yeah.
There's several people nationwide that are teaching Bud Williams marketing, and I made more money out of attending those marketing classes from Ann Barnhart and Bud Williams. And I spent a lot of time with Bud and with Wally Olson, and I know there's Doug Ferguson in Nebraska, and then you have Bud's daughter and her husband are teaching livestock marketing as well.
Yeah.
And anybody that has not attended one or more of these schools needs to get busy and make that a priority.
Yeah.
If you're going to be in the cattle business, you need to do that because it works. And like I say, I made way more money out of that than I did all of the spreadsheet bullshit, pardon my French, and those sort of things that we had in college. There's a lot of gibberish. There's a lot of high-mindedness there that'll never make you any money. But when you go to these schools, you'll learn how to make money if you'll do what they tell you to do.
What did, I'm curious, the first time you saw Bud, what did he charge you? Was it $500 he used to charge for? I'm trying to think what the first
time I
marketing.
went to Bud, it was $500, and it was a 4-day seminar, 2 days on marketing, 2 days on stockmanship.
Yeah. What do you figure your return on that was?
It was me and one other guy.
Uh-huh. No kidding.
And the other guy left after one day.
And he'd had enough of this crap, huh?
And so, Bud, he gave me the whole load, the whole load of hay right there. He said, you know what? He said, we get along pretty well. He said, I won't talk to you on the phone, so don't bother about calling me. But he said, you can call Eunice if you want to and come down here and see me anytime. I'll spend how much time that you want to spend with me. And so that was a blessing. I live in Paris, Texas. He lived in Bowie, Texas at that point in time.
Yeah.
I would run down to Bowie fairly regularly and visit with him. And he was just fabulous. And then later on, he moved to Independence, Kansas. And he and Wally Olson and myself would visit. And we'd go see about cattle we had in northwestern Kansas together. And so it was wonderful. But, Ann Barnhart was a good teacher. Wally Olson's a good teacher. Bud was a good teacher. And once again, I've not been to any Doug Ferguson stuff. I understand he's very accomplished and very good as well.
Does a great job teaching. Yeah,
that's what I understand. So,
and Tina and Richard, too.
Yeah, and Tina and them do a great job also, from what I understand. That's enough for me on the soapbox there. But anybody that hadn't been needs to go. Anybody that's only been once probably ought to pick out somebody else and go again.
ROI on the $500 you spent on that first school? Any guess?
I can't tell you what it is. But
how long did it take you to double your $500? It wasn't a month.
No, it wasn't. I'll tell you what, it was just fabulous.
That's great. That's really good. And you would, from Bowie, it'd be about 3 hours across there, barring the fact that DFW is in the middle?
Yeah. Well, actually, DFW south of us. So
so you go across through.
Yeah, I went straight
Gainesville.
through. Yeah, straight through Gainesville and down. So it was an easy drive for me.
Very good. Bob, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time today. There are lots more things I would like to ask you about, but we may get into those another time. This idea, again, that I keep hearing that, boy, the market is high, maybe I should sell my cows. Like you say, unless a person is just plumb done and just wants out of everything and just wants to have a stack of cash. I think when I hear young people say that, it breaks my heart because I think it reflects a really poor understanding of what we're able to do in our industry.
Essentially, if you want out of the cows and you want to go to yearlings, that's one thing. If you want out of the cows, try to market time, it's another. And it's one of those situations where you think you know all the answers, but you don't know all the questions yet. Just
like old John Bogle, you're gonna get an education there, right? Hey, one last thing, and we might do a whole separate episode on this at some point in the future, but I hear all the time that it is a lot harder to make a living now than it used to be. You've been around for a while. Is that true?
No, it's ridiculous.
But interest rates are really high, man.
Well, interest rates aren't what they were in 1981 either.
Well, no, but stuff is more expensive, right?
Well, yeah, but
my college loans are killing me. I can't hardly pay them back.
Yeah, you should have been a plumber. You should have gone into the trades, John. You ought not have borrowed money on that crap.
So do you think it's easier to make it in ranching now than it was 40 years ago even?
I think so. You know, I get tickled. We read this stuff. We delude ourselves by what the media tells us. They say Americans are working harder than they ever have. They're even reading their emails. They're even reading their emails while they're on vacation. That's how hard they're working. And I said, so we contrast that not to growing up on a cotton farm in 1910 where you hoed cotton from 4 a.m. till 8 p.m.
But you had a nice air-conditioned house to go back to, and you call it joy other than that, right?
That's right. You know, you and I saw a real interesting article from First Trust recently about the cost of buying a house in 1968 was basically 2.6 times earned income, the median income.
Average annual income, yeah.
And now it's, I think, 5.7 times average annual income. And so you say, well, golly, that means right there that it's gotten harder to get by. Well, no, it really hadn't. And we need to think about it and put it in perspective. In 1968, that average house was probably somewhere around 1,100 or 1,200 square feet, if it was that much.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't have marble countertops. It didn't have a lot of the amenities. Now,
didn't have a microwave. Did it have indoor plumbing?
Oh, yeah, it had indoor plumbing. It had indoor plumbing, but I said 1968, not 1908, John.
Okay.
We contrast that to today. The average home somewhere around 2,300 square feet, and it's got all the amenities and yada, 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 yada.
Please don't tell my wife that.
Yeah. Once again, I had a friend told his daughter one time, she said, you know, Daddy, you just don't understand. You live up there in Paris, Texas, and cost of living's cheap. We live down here in Plano. The high cost of living's getting. And he said, no, baby, that's not the case. The cost of living high in Plano is what's getting you. And so there are a lot of people that are having financial difficulties today, and they think life's so hard, but most of it is because their wants have outrun their needs substantially, John.
Mm-hmm.
And they've gotten themselves into a bind with too many new vehicles, big houses, and too little money devoted to saving and investment.
But I have to have an 80-inch TV.
Well, yeah, but the 80-inch TV is $700. 80-inch TV is okay.
Good.
4,000 square foot house, $125,000 dually when you're not running a hot shot company or hauling cattle all the time is not okay.
I love it. Very good. Well, it's good to get some perspective on that because, again, we are just overrun with how hard it is to make it in America right now. And I just feel like we're lying to ourselves over and over again and giving ourselves an excuse to just be poor.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Well, and I mean poor, not necessarily in a financial sense, just us to be poorly, maybe is a better way to say it.
I'll tell you what, we're by far the best of the worst. There's no doubt about it. And I'm proud to be in the United States. We will survive a Democratic regime. We will survive a Republican regime because of who we are. We need to say that's all noise. Yep. We don't need to whine about beef imports. We don't need to whine about Biden. We don't need to whine about Trump. We need to get off our ass every morning, go to work, and control what we can control and not worry about what we can't control.
Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.